Kia ora, my name is Sarah and I'll be running you through a high-level overview of the Nutrient and Erosion Management Workbook. This workbook has been developed to help growers implement both the Nutrient Management Code of Practice and the Erosion and Sediment Control Code of Practice. Both of these codes of practice were updated this year in 2026. Now, use of this workbook is not compulsory, however, it is very helpful to implement the practices and processes that are set out in both of these codes. However, if you have this information stored elsewhere, please continue to use whatever format or method works best for you and your operation. When you first download the workbook, which is available on Horticulture's website under Grower Resources Codes of Practice, you should open up to this workbook overview page. Please have a read through the instructions. And to note, it is best to open this workbook in Microsoft Excel. This ensures that all the inbuilt formulas function correctly. Now, when reading through this, you'll read here that updates to this workbook can occur at any time. So as part of your annual review, please check the Horticulture website to ensure you are using the latest version before you start inputting your information. Cells coloured light yellow are fillable. You'll notice that a lot of the workbook is locked down. This is to ensure that it works correctly and as intended. Take a look at the contents page. All of these are clickable links to help with easy navigation. So the workbook is set up where we have a business information tab to begin with, 2 risk assessments, the nitrogen loss risk assessment and the erosion and phosphorus loss risk assessment, followed by a summary, which summarises your risk assessment information for all of your blocks. Following that, we have 3 sets of tabs and 4 sets of tabs for your nutrient risk group tables and the erosion risk group tables. These tables overview the practices to implement on your blocks based on the level of risk assessed. Then at the end, there is a tab to capture any other actions that could be required as part of your nutrient management plan or your erosion and sediment control plan. So we'll start with the business information tab to set the scene. So once you jump into this tab, please complete any key details. This just covers business name, person responsible, addresses, and then just when the workbook was prepared and when you aim to review it next. This just helps you keep in a good review cycle. We also have space to capture any goals and objectives relating to your nutrient management or erosion sediment control plans. If you have this information somewhere else, that is fine. Just include a link to where you have that stored in case you're going through this with an auditor and need to find it. After the business information, you'll come across the first risk assessment, which is the nitrogen loss risk assessment. So this tab links to section 4.2 in the Nutrient Management Code of Practice. And it's recommended that you familiarise yourself with the content first in the Code of Practice to get an overview of why this risk assessment has been prepared, and then come back to the workbook to complete it. So you can either use the flowcharts in the Code of Practice, or you can use this table here, which has the flowcharts inbuilt behind it, so you don't need to follow through. You just need to input the information required, and it will allocate you a nutrient risk group at the end. So before starting this risk assessment, you need to make sure you have a few bits of information on hand. First, you need to provide block IDs for all the blocks within your operation. So blocks can be defined at the scale at which decisions are made and practices implemented and or delineated based on factors such as crop type, soil type, topography, or practices. So you can either use paddocks or blocks that you currently use as part of your normal operation across your growing operation, or you can choose to combine several paddocks or blocks and group them into larger groups. That could work better if you think that the risk is the same. For example, if across your whole orchard you always apply the same amount of nitrogen and it's the same topography, the same soil type, then you might just call that one big block. Once you've got your block IDs, you'll also need to have your annual rainfall, soil profile available water, total annual nitrogen applied, and whether or not you've applied more than 75 kilos of nitrogen per hectare in a single application. As you can see, a little pop-up. Some of these cells have notes, so just hover over, and if you need more information on more details about each of these categories, then just have a read and click through to the links provided. So I'll go through and input a little bit of information so you can see how this risk assessment works in practice. First, I'll put in my block ID. My name is Sarah, so I'll say Sarah's block A. Let's say I have a block of onions that is 5 hectares. My annual rainfall is, let's say, 1100 millimeters, so the category would be 1000 to 1300 millimeters. And I have a soil profile available water that is moderate. So you can see here, after I input those two pieces of biophysical information, it has assigned my block an amber biophysical risk. You have a play around with different categories just so you understand how the assessment works. Then I'm going to input my information to complete the nitrogen fertilizer use risk part of the risk assessment. So on my onion block, I applied 170 kgs of nitrogen per hectare, and that includes organic inputs. And no, I did not apply more than 75 kilograms of nitrogen in a single application. So you can see here it has assigned me a nitrogen use risk of red, and the combination of a red nitrogen use risk and an amber biophysical risk has resulted in a red nutrient risk group. After we've done the erosion and phosphorus loss risk assessment, we'll jump into the NRG tabs to explain how you use this red nutrient risk group or any other risk level that you might get with your operation and when you put in your details, and I'll show you how you then use that information to implement the practices that are in the code of practice. Now that we've finished our nitrogen loss risk assessment, we'll jump across and do our erosion and phosphorus loss risk assessment, which is the next tab. And you'll see here that my block ID has automatically copied across into the table here. So the erosion and phosphorus loss risk assessment can be found in section 2.2 of the Erosion and Sediment Control Code of Practice, or section 4.3 of the Nutrient Management Code of Practice. So the same risk assessment is used in both of these cases because soil erosion is the most significant phosphorus loss pathway in horticultural production systems. So that's why we use the erosion risk assessment as a proxy for phosphorus loss risk, and the risk assessments are the same in both of the codes. Now, before completing your erosion and phosphorus loss risk assessment, you'll need to have some information on hand. You can see here you'll need to have your slope in degrees, soil texture, block erosivity, and block row length. And all of these, like I said earlier, for the nitrogen loss risk assessment need to be completed at the block level. And we have assumed, as you can see with this information copying across, that you will use the same blocks for your nitrogen loss risk assessment and your erosion risk assessment. Before completing the risk assessment in this workbook, it can be useful to familiarise yourself with the risk assessment that is in the code of practice. Let's get into it, and I'll address this Don't Muddy the Waters web app after we do the erosion risk assessment. So you can see the block information has copied across, and I have this information on hand. So I will go through and do the erosion risk assessment. The first question asks you whether or not soil is uncultivated or less than 25% bare at any time of the year. This is just to separate permanent horticulture from cultivated or cropping horticulture. So I have an onion paddock. So I'm going to say no, soil is not uncultivated because I cultivate. The slope of my paddock is, say, 2 degrees. And the next question asks whether or not the soil texture is sand or loamy sand. No, I'm in a clay loam, let's say, so no. And block erosivity, I am farming in, let's say, Tuako. And if we look up here, this map is also available in the Code of Practice in a high resolution. I'm in a high erosivity area. So we'll scroll back across, click high, and you can see that has assigned me an erosion risk group of amber. And I haven't needed to put in my block row length. Now, as an alternative to using the erosion risk assessment, you can use the decision support tool, the Don't Muddy the Waters web app. So Don't Muddy the Waters is a free web app that calculates erosion and sediment loss rates, as well as pre and post mitigation loss rates for any given paddock or block based on slope, location, ground cover, row lengths, and mitigations that you might have in place. So this web app uses research from the SFFF project Don't Muddy the Waters, as well as factors from the revised universal soil loss equation to model erosion rates. Have a look at the app. We've got some links here if you hover over. It's hosted on the RNI's website. If you would like to use the Don't Muddy the Waters web app instead of the erosion risk assessment, just to note, when you input information into these cells, it will override the erosion risk group that is allocated from these questions. Once you've completed your erosion and phosphorus loss risk assessment, along with your nitrogen loss risk assessment, navigate across to the Risk Summary tab, which provides a really handy summary of each of your blocks and their final nutrient risk group and erosion group allocations based on the risk assessments. Now that we've completed our risk assessments, I'll now run you through the NRG and ERG tables. The nutrient risk group tables, NRG tables, and the erosion risk group, ERG tables, are essentially action plan tables where you can record what management practices you have implemented, partially implemented, or are working towards implementing. So on this tab, we are on the NRG group green practices. So this tab contains a list of all the management practices which are in the Nutrient Management Code of Practice, and whether or not for green they are a minimum practice or an additional practice. To understand what minimum and additional means, refer to the Code of Practice, and we've got a table here which summarises which group and which practices you need to implement for green, amber, or red. Management practices include things like having a nutrient management plan, making sure fertiliser spreading operators are trained and competent, and an example of an additional practice could be implementing controlled traffic farming or retiring marginal land. Depending on the risk allocated to each of your blocks, the blocks will pop up here in this column. So if we jump across to NRG red, which is what our risk assessment result was, you'll see here that Sarah's block A has populated in the first cell of this column. So this just helps you understand which blocks come under which NRG group. For ERG, it's the same format. We have our blocks along here, and then the management practices you'd be looking to implement for each risk level. So you can see here for the risk level very low, which is for our permanent horticulture operations, there aren't many practices to implement because the risk of erosion is very low. These tables are really useful to help you as a grower track what practices you are currently implementing and what practices you should look to implement in the future. You'll see here, for each nutrient risk group, you are asked to work towards a percentage of minimum practices and a percentage of additional practices. So for all nutrient risk groups, you should be working towards achieving 100% of minimum practices. And in this case, for nutrient risk group red, you'd be looking to implement 50% of additional practices. So with an increasing level of risk, you should be doing more to manage that risk. Over here, each tab has some guidance on selecting yes, partial, no, or NA, as that can often be an area of confusion. And just to note, when you input yes, or partials, this percentage will automatically calculate to help you track what percentage of minimum and additional practices you have achieved. You will need to complete a table for each of your blocks that fall into each category. So for example, if all of your blocks fall under red, then you just need to complete this tab here for red practices. However, if you have blocks across each NRG, so green, amber and red, then you'll need to fill in each of these tables for each of the blocks. You will have practices that apply to the whole operation, therefore the same evidence or actions can be copied across for each table. And just to note, the same will apply for your erosion risk groups. To help track what actions you need to work towards or what management practices you need to look towards implementing, you can use these filter buttons to select, say, partial, and then it will just filter out the actions that are tagged as partial or no if you had any actions that were marked as a no. That can just help you navigate through the table. Once you've finished with your NRG and ERG tables, jump across to the Other Actions tab. This is a space for you to capture any other actions that might relate to your nutrient management plan or your erosion and sediment control plan, which could be participation in trials, or if you as an operation are trying something new or novel. It's just another space to show what you are doing as an operation to work towards managing your risk of nutrient loss. And that's it for this workbook. If you would like more information or support, please contact HortNZ. Thank you.